Although it was illegal, birth control promoted by Margaret Sanger and others and was widely accepted. The sexual revolution brought about some emancipation. Flapper styles expressed the new freedom of women. One-piece bathing suits shocked older Americans. Women could smoke and socialize with men in public more freely than before. As women became more independent, they continued to organize. The National Women's Party began in 1923 to agitate for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution, the ERA, led by Alice Paul. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 by leaders of the Nassau. Divorce laws were liberalized in many states at the insistence of women. Many women stayed in the workforce after World War I. There was a rise in church and synagogue membership as a reaction to a changing society. The term jazz became popular after World War I. For its pre-World War I development, African-influenced slave spirituals grew into jubilees and the blues. Black folk music retained a certain melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic element that formed a common bond of sound. In the late 19th century, minstrelsy, vaudeville, sentimental ballads, and band music were the most popular genres among both white and black audiences. Ragtime works became published in the late 1890s, and it was considered to be the earliest form of jazz. Blues developed simultaneously along with ragtime. Louis Armstrong became the first master improviser, and some see this as the creation of jazz. During World War I, the migration of blacks north also meant the migration of jazz to northern cities. The Harlem Renaissance. Harlem was a black enclave in New York City with about 100,000 residents in the 1920s, and it grew rapidly during and after World War I. It had the largest black population in the northern U.S. Harlem produced a wealth of African American poetry, literature, art, and music, expressing the pain, sorrow, and discrimination blacks felt at this time. Famous poets included Langston Hughes and Claude McKay. Famous jazz musicians included Duke Ellington and the Cotton Club, which was a famous nightclub. Marcus Garvey was the leader of the United Negro Improvement Association. His Back to Africa movement sole purpose was to promote the resettlement of American blacks in Africa. It advocated black racial pride and separatism rather than integration. Garvey was a native of Jamaica and founded UNIA there. The Black Star Steamship Company was intended to transport his black followers to Africa, but went bankrupt in 1923. The FBI director J. Edgar Hoover monitored Garvey and eventually sought to have him arrested and imprisoned. Garvey instilled self-confidence and self-reliance among blacks and later became the basis for the Nation of Islam, the black Muslim movement in the 1960s. The Lost Generation. After World War I, a new generation of writers outside of the dominant Protestant New England burst upon the literary scene. Their works were often conveyed resentment of ideals betrayed by society. The term was coined by Gertrude Stein, one of the leaders of the Lost Generation. Henry Mencken, in his American Mercury magazine, assailed marriage, patriotism, democracy, prohibition, Rotarians, and the middle-class American. Attacked by do-gooders as Puritans, Puritanism was the haunting fear that someone somewhere might be happy. Became somewhat of a patron saint among many young authors whom he admired for their critical attitude toward American society. F. Scott Fitzgerald, at the age of 24, published This Side of Paradise, and he became an overnight celebrity. His most famous work is The Great Gatsby of 1925. Theodore Dreiser also wrote an American tragedy. Ernest Hemingway fought in World War I on the Italian front in 1970. He responded to propaganda and overblown appeal of patriotism by devising his own lean, world-sparing style. The Sun also rises. His work wrote of disillusioned, spiritually numb American expatriates in Europe. His book, Farewell to Arms, was one of the finest novels in any language about the war experience. Sinclair Lewis chronicled Midwestern life from his home in Minnesota as an inquisitive, amoral, and hypercritical. His book, Main Street, was a story of one woman's unsuccessful war against provincialism. His other work, Babbitt, affectionately pillared by George F. Babbitt, a prosperous, vulgar, middle-class real estate broker who slavishly conformed to the respectable materialism of his group. William Faulkner, the Mississippian, considered perhaps the best American novelist of the 20th century. His Soldier's Pay, which was a bitter war novel. His other work, The Sound and the Fury, and As I Lay Dying, depicted the consciousness from the constructed souls of his ingrown Southern characters. Poets such as T.S. Eliot wrote The Wasteland, one of the most influential poems of the century. Robert Frost criticized his adopted New England. E. E. Cummings relied on diction and peculiar typesetting to produce new poetical effects. In the area of architecture, received Frank Lloyd Wright, the most famous architect in U.S. history. His buildings should grow from their sites, not slavishly imitate Greek and Roman models.